Before we start, we'd like to share with you the news that we have figured out when the summer workshops are going to be. Again, this summer we will have two workshops in each location. One, a novice, which is for our teachers who are either switching over to Cambridge or haven't used it for very long, or a refresher, or in general want to learn about the reading method, even if they don't use Cambridge. And then our second workshop, and that one focuses to a great degree on units 1 and 2. The experience workshop is for teachers who've been using the course for a long time, probably use 3, if not 4 units of it. And they come to the workshop bringing a lot of experience with them. So we're able to have a different level of dialogue. Anyone is invited to come to all 4 days. In January, we will have the Eventbrite up, and we'll get it, the links to that for all of you to sign up. But we just want to make sure you put the dates aside.
FanLit. What can we say about FanLit? I mean, it's been around for a long time. It is that reaction to the canon. It is that thing that people get so involved in, so engaged in, that they want to do more, read more, understand more. And certainly, FanLit for CLC happens when your students really get into a story. They want to change the ending. They want to know more. They want to become part of the story. And as we all know, the more they read, the more they care, the better they're going to be at their Latin.
So we'll talk a little bit about the different types of FanLit. And the first one is speculative. You know, the what ifs, what could have happened, what would have happened, based on the storyline and the different characters in our text. And we can come up with all sorts of things on our own, but your students really love doing this. And as we just said, the more they read and the better they know the storyline and get into the characters, the more they want to speculate about what could have happened, what would have happened, etc.
And one of the ones that you can think of is we often wondered, in at least up until the 4th edition, what happened to Grumio? What happened to Mattila? And students would often come up with stories, and they're out there. And what if Luke, in the 5th edition, what if Lucia did not die? What if, she had gotten married, or traveled with Quintus, or had her own experiences, lost her memory? That would be using those kind of questions with our own course.
And this is, not only movies, which are pictured here, but those novels. The novel Lavinia is speculative. What was her take on the Trojan War? The same is true of Ovid's Heroides. There, how the women would have reacted. So there's lots of speculative FanLit out there. The next kind is
gap filling.
I couldn't read. I'm sorry. To fill in the blanks. What happens in between? What if in Cold Mountain, what were the women doing during the Civil War? But yeah. So what about our book? What's the thing that would be happening in the book that would be filling a gap?
For example, like what happened when Quintus was in Greece. We have like a very few sentences and possibly a little bit of a story, but theoretically, even what was it like for him to leave Pompeii and go to the other parts of Italy and then into Greece and all of that?
And then, what about the new play Hades in New York? Yeah. It is filling a gap. Why did Penelope stay? So that's another kind. And then there's the continuing kind. Well, we just watched a movie, a lot of us, the Mary Poppins movie. It continues from where the old story goes on. It is also in lots of the graphic novels. It continues a story that was started as a canon, and it goes on from there.
And we get excited about those, like when the Mary Poppins Return popped up, pardon the pun, or anytime we see that kind of what happened 20 years later. Mad About You is about to have that. And we want to know what happened to our characters after the fact.
The
We're
next
going to talk
kind,
more. Go ahead.
the next
We'll
kind
talk
is
more about it later, but one of our CLC teachers has written us two sets of stories that pretty much continue the plot line in some way, shape, or form.
and the next one is this alternative universe, which is the TV show Timeless, which they of course took off because I always take off what I happen to like, but it was an alternative universe. What about if Grumio, and I think we have a story about Grumio selling rocks in one of the test booklets, that he's selling rocks um, after the eruption, and somebody comes back to find him. That's an alternative universe because it couldn't happen.
And then we have my favorite one, self-insertion. I would love to be Doctor Who and put myself into things. I used sometimes ask my students, okay, we landed in Pompeii. What would it be like? What would you see? What would you smell? Or anywhere else that we were in the course? How would it be different than where you are now? And, tell me that story.
And many of you are familiar with the Stephen Saylor books and Gordianus, who's been inserted into all of his novels that just really expand the storyline. And there's so much culture in there that you can learn by having that character inserted. And of course, Lindsay Davis is another author, and Dan Brown. So we see it not just in film, but in literature as well.
And then, of course, there's the last kind that we're mentioning, which is shipping, which is putting people in romantic situations where possibly there isn't one. It can be a bromance too. Doesn't have to just be a romance. Scully and Mulder, Olivia and Elliot, Edward and Bella from Twilight. Well, what if Mattila and Grumio ran away from Pompeii together? What would that relationship be like?
I heard they did.
Okay.
Over the years, that's what the rumor was.
Uh-huh.
And we're sure many of your students have probably come up with other scenarios. There's a lot of things that are already out there, that are already published, that are teacher created. And the first thing that comes to mind is the Fabulae on Calantes. These were the stories that Stan Pharaoh wrote. There are two different books. There's a book of additional stories for units 1 and 2, and then a second book that covers units 3 and 4. And all of the stories in there are based upon the characters and the storyline of the Cambridge Latin course. And then more recently, we have Fabulae Mirabiles and Fabulae Mirabiliores. These are additional stories that Jenny referenced a moment ago that have been written by Kyle Smith Laird, who is a middle school teacher here in Los Angeles. And Stan Pharaoh was kind enough to edit all of the stories for Kyle, and they are really well done. And they are available through NACCP or cambridgelatin.org. So if you're looking for some new stories that haven't been out that long, I would highly recommend both of those. Fabulae Mirabiles is covering units, covering unit 1, and then Fabulae Mirabiliores is unit 2.
Has he picked a title for unit 3?
No, no.
All right.
Yet.
I don't know
No,
if it'd be the Mirabilis. No, it can't be.
I'm thinking.
Okay.
And then so the tests for units for 4E, they all began with a story, some of which were Stan stories and some were generated by other people. So there's still more stories there that can be taken and used. And then Cambridge has published 2 short books. One's Vesuvius and Other Plays. They're not long. And Dunlop's short Latin stories, which I like because they are keyed to the Cambridge Latin course. It tells you in the back of the book what stage would be a good stage to use them on. Tells you what language points are being covered, some of the vocabulary, and it also they're not particularly related to the book as far as content. So it's a really nice mix of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. There's something of Cicero's that's been modified greatly, and it's just a statement about what Cicero was thinking, and some of them are myths. So it's a nice mix. The reality is, if you take a lot of these different things and you put them all together, we have a sizable reader, in essence, of other than the main textbook literature.
You have to be careful with Fabulae Anculantes, though, when you read it, if you start to use it, because some of those were used then in the stage 5, excuse me,
5
edition.
Yeah.
Tests, and so you have to be careful that you check the test.
Yeah, both 4E and 5E have stands. Yeah.
Yeah.
If that's important to you to have a sight reading.
And here's a sample of the table of contents from Kyle Smith Laird's stories. So you can just tell by the title of the stories some of the characters that he expands upon. So notice there are 32 stories that were written for Unit 1 and 34 stories for Unit 2. And as you can just quickly peruse the titles of those stories just to get an idea of perhaps about what he's writing of.
And it goes down to stage 12 and stage 20. It was just the print would have been too small for you to have seen it on the screen. These are available from the CambridgeLatin.org or at CambridgeLatin.org. They're part of the things that we sell to raise money for the scholarships. They're usually very minimally priced, but they're definitely worth looking at. I like the fact Eumachia keeps showing up all over the place. There seems to be a lot of different kind of perspectives here, to go back to what Donna said.
Well, and look at Markia Ultor. So how is Markia going to get her revenge for
Mattila?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kyle really focused on bringing more females into all of these stories.
Very cool. And to give you a taste of that, here is one of his stories.
And each one of his stories also comes with a set of comprehension questions.
And I'm assuming this is the only new vocabulary here, the words in bold print?
Yes.
Okay, so that's really good. It's a lot of words that they would have been expected to know at this point, or at least had a familiarity with, right?
Yes.
There are more questions than that. Again, it was a matter of being able to see what the questions were. And so it's really nice to have those questions ready for you, and you don't have to think about, well, what am I going to ask about this one? So it's ready-made for you. It's ready-made for you to maybe be gone. Use it as something for when you have to be out of the classroom.
Or do it as part of a warm-up. Give them the story one day and the next day give them, some of the questions. Or, ask them orally. There's so many different ways you can do something like that. That's why we like it, that a lot of our stuff provides you with questions. It's not to make it just a worksheet. It's to give you flexibility whether, as Donna says, you use it as a worksheet or you do something else with it. You can even cut it up and everybody pulls one out of, a hat and they have to answer just that one. So looking at how you do write a story, our really go-to person until Kyle showed up was Stan Pharaoh. And Stan did a webinar for us a year or so ago, and it was on how he wrote his stories. And one of the things he had identified was that there was 5 basic kinds of actions that you could write about for the characters, which kind of goes along with some of what Donna was talking about at the beginning.
Yeah, filling and anticipation, all those things. Yes.
And this one always, the kids are like, well, what did Quintus say? Is it, excuse me, is it simply that he realizes he's a citizen, or has he got a letter for Rufus? And then if he has a letter, what does the letter say?
Yeah, that right-hand column is referring to Stan's Fabulae on Calantes, and the numbers in parentheses reference the stage and how the stories are numbered in that booklet.
And you can almost do your own, like have the kids come up with what ifs based on this kind of a thing, and then show them the story, and see how close they got. So Stan doesn't want you to work too hard at this, but he wants you to know that there's certain things that make a really good idea to make a good, there's certain things that will help you if you think about them first. And that is, what is the grammar that's going on in this story, and maybe the grammar that you've used in other stories that have been used in other stages. And if it's important to have those, then make a list of them and check it off as you're going along. It also can keep you honest from sticking something in there that you think might be clever, but nobody's going to know what it is.
And you don't want to gloss too many words.
No. It might be nice to use a gerundive of obligation, but you're going to have to gloss the whole thing. So unless it's, pardon the pun, really necessary, you don't want to be doing that.
And you can tell from the picture that he's taken, it's a takeoff on one of the stories in the stage. So.
Oh, Milo, yeah.
Yeah. And he's also puts out here that they need to make sure that your checklist words are there. Well, how do you do that? How do you make sure? There are a couple of ways to do that, and it's helpful for you in the teacher's manual to check that out.
And in addition to comparing the actual checklist, the other thing you can do is look in the glossary in the back of the book, and it'll show you where a word is first introduced in a checklist. So, if you look up a word and it says 11 or 12 or doesn't have a number in front of it, again, you're going to have to gloss that for the kids, And if you want them to have high success, as we know with CI, the goal isn't to be hitting them with a lot of new words, but to help them recognize words that they've seen enough that they're starting to be familiar with it. Oh, here I skipped ahead. Forgive me.
Yeah, so this is what it looks like in the textbook at the back of the book.
It was such a good idea. I didn't know we had done it. So there's the 5 or the 2, and it tells you that would be where that word first showed up.
So it's a good thing to have. It's sometimes really, really hard to make up a small story with, just 25 to 30 points in it. So you just probably need 3 to 4 paragraphs, not any more than that. Because then you've just complicated the thing to death. Of course, the hardest part of writing any story is the ending. How do you have a hook? How do you get that story to be really interesting? So I'm not particularly funny, so that doesn't happen for me very often. But sometimes I can leave a story open-ended and the kids can fill it in because we know how many clowns we have in our classrooms. So they have good ideas to finish up those stories.
And a short story can have some really good stuff that's practicing. There's a lot of first person perfects. And, that's the kind of things that sometimes the kids trip over just because there's no ego floating nearby. Um, so you can do a lot in a short amount of sentences, small amount of sentences.
And again, it just depends on how much time you have. It can be very time consuming. And if you've never tried to write a story, there is an awful lot that goes into it.
I would say the easiest thing to do, even before you do as much as Stan puts down there, is take a story in the book, a short or a paragraph of a story, and substitute words. Make it your own in that you are changing the content, but not the structure. It really is a good way to get started.
And this is just a list that Stan came up with of other topics to write about. Many other cultural topics, as you can see here. A lot of Roman characteristics, stories that are just based on an actual historical event.
From a different perspective, maybe.
Yes.
Of course, kids love to have stories about themselves. So he says thinly disguised references. It doesn't have to be always thinly disguised, but they love to be part of the story.
And sometimes, stories to commemorate an event, not just big fancy ones. I've often told the story that one of my students had a bear in his backyard. And we live, I don't know what that was, but we live by the beach. And so,
It was a boat thing.
You write a story about something they all know about. Pliny's ghost story is another example, or some of the stuff from the Satyricon, that you could take a outrageous story and make it a lot simpler. In essence, scaffolding the story to a degree, so that it would be easier for the students to know the story or get exposed to it much sooner than they would if you had to wait until they got to upper level Latin to read it.
And this is also that place that you could put in some myth. Now, the myth can be ancient myth or it can be modern myth, but you can take that time when you're reading about Hercules to tell a story about Hercules, or any of the other times that when the underworld comes up, you can do a story about Hades using the same vocabulary that they're working with, so that they get some background, whether it's for the NLE or just because you wanted to know who the Olympians were.
And everybody loves stories about animals, whether they're real animals or fictional animals, whether it's about Kerberos or the cat. You can take even, as Donna showed us before, some of the cartoons. Or your own personal animals. One year I had my students send a Valentine to their cat or dog or whatever pet they had, and they had to use the genitive. So you can go much further than just one little thing, but everyone gets a kick out of this stuff. And of course, there's the Winnie the Pooh. Someone took that idea and ran with it.
Yes. And then Stan gave all of us some sage advice. And probably the most important part is to make up the story first, then do other things around it. So you can't go out of sequence, or you have to redo the story. It's
because you'll have used the statements in your questions, and then you're just really reiterating them in your story, which would be boring.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, one of the things that came across when Kyle was writing his stories was that he had the story in his head, but once he got it on paper, a lot of times it was a matter of, oh, well, this grammar point hadn't been introduced yet, or this vocabulary word hasn't shown up yet. So it can get quite time consuming, and there's just a lot to think about when you're writing them yourselves.
Even be a culture point that you got to make sure it makes sense within the context,
And
unless it's outrageous.
And I think one of the things for me in my classes was that I wanted a story to read every day. That's what I wanted the kids to do. And so I sometimes needed these extra stories just to be able to do that. Or if we were practicing for a stage test or whatever, that we read an extra story just to practice. So I could never have enough of these.
And that's
I did have the advantage of being able to take whatever time I wanted on a stage. So because I had middle schoolers, but
I
I
was gonna,
still liked all the stories.
I was going to comment that that's the whole idea of the extensive reading approach, to give the kids lots of exposure in lots of different ways so that they're not seeing a reading as a task to be accomplished. They're seeing reading as something you just do constantly, right?
Right.
It's something that's fun to do.
And it's fun to do, right? True, not a task, but the fun, right? And something they're competent in doing. Because so often, I think kids will look at something as a task when it feels threatening to them, or like it's going to be arduous. So if they've gotten used to seeing these characters and sentences of similar natures, as you know, the Cambridge Latin course is all about sentence patterns, they're going to be like, oh, here's another story about Caecilius. Here's another story about so and so, Kerberos. And again, the more exposure to the vocabulary they get, the more this is going to feel good to them.
And of course, there's those times when your students can create them, and they can create stories. Yes, sometimes that's difficult for them because of their whatever level they're in. Their command of the Latin is not as strong as their command of their imagination. And so it's a little tricky. But there are things that you can do with them that is fan lit and is within their control.
So some of the things are some kinds of poems that they can write. One of my favorites was some kind of a journal or diary entry. Nowadays, we would say a post or a tweet. It used to be a headline. Again, a letter, which could be like the journal, only you're actually writing to someone. One we don't have on here is, there used to be a group of exercises that were sentence building. You took one word from this column and this column, and then a verb from this column and a prepositional phrase from here, and you ended up with a sentence. And if you did it enough times, you had a very strange story. So that's one way. Those are some of the ways you can start to walk them through the process of creating their own. And some of the prompts are these.
And those are fun things for them to do, even if it's only to get them to think about the extension of the story.
I was going to say,
Because you want to anticipate always what's going to happen. Is there something bad going to happen here? You want them engaged with the stories because they are good and because it makes them want to come back for more. The most thrilling thing in a classroom is for a kid to say, oh, we're going to do a story today. That's wonderful.
I like what happens off screen too. I mean, again, it's the different perspective. Lucrio they're trying to get Lucrio off to the theater so that Grumio and Papaya can have a nice moment. But what was happening at the theater? And how was Quintus and Metella's day going? That kind of thing.
And the students always love to read a story and then come up with a different ending to the story, or expand what's already been written and just keep going with it. And it doesn't have to be anything long and involved. You can simply do it orally with the students. They don't have to write this out. They don't have to write it in Latin. It's just a good way to keep that storyline in their heads by doing some of these extra things.
Yeah, that there are, this is one of the things that they can do. They can make a diamond poem. Jenny and I were talking about this when we were doing the PowerPoint, and she said that you start with one person and end with another. I learned it that you start with one word and end up with the same word, not same word, but an equivalent of that word. So that's what this diamond poem is about. This is Melissa, and then she's an Ankila. Well, what are all the things, what's she like? What does she do? What is she involved with? And so they are gaining strength with vocabulary, gaining strength with their language acquisition, all of those things. They have to know that in Wheela is a prepositional phrase, and that Dokta modifies Melissa, and the delectat is at. They have to know all those things. And I guess we should put Sifax as Sifakim.
Yes,
Yeah.
Make it accusative. I didn't think about that till right now.
Good catch.
Well, I was going to say two things. One is if you're doing something like this and you don't feel that your students are strong in, being able to access noun, adjective, verb, you can always give them a list and help them to take things from different parts of the list to create this. The one I had seen that was different, or the ones that I had seen often, there was a contrast. Like it would be Melissa to Mattila, and some of the words would be, somewhere in the line with the noun. It would go from some word they had in common, but then the difference between being an Ankala and a Domina, or if it was, Mattila and Caecilius, somewhere in the middle there, usually like two would be her and then two would be him, and the rest would be a description of him. The whole point is to have them be a little creative and have some fun showing they know something about these characters and use the vocabulary. I mean, it's a good exercise no matter how you do it. And then all of us, this is our favorite.
My kids love to do this, and I would just let them have free reign. I mean, they had to follow the rules for the limerick, and so it had to be the right rhythm.
Right.
But they would, once they, not every kid, of course, but once they started, it was like, oh, can I do another one? Can I do another one? So you can read them. The second one, they've tried to be clever and put some Latin words in there. And you can make that part of your assignment. Include 2 Latin words in your limerick. So it doesn't make any difference. But again, they follow the storyline and they get to add to it.
And then some of them like to rap them or say them in rhythm, and it's kind of fun. And then
they always wanted to read them. Can I read mine? Sure.
Yeah.
I always love to volunteer, and the kids that do the rap are really good.
And all of a sudden, what seems boring, when some kid raps, Aristo wanted a sheep. Instead, he lived with the Creek, and they get off on it. All of a sudden, everybody's like, oh, this isn't so old fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
They love all that. So we didn't want this to be, it can be a graded activity, but we were wondering and thinking that, wouldn't this be fun to make it something that's just fun? That the grade can be very simple. Yes, they participated and they got involved. You can, that would be the way we'd like to see it happen. And then you can take the idea, if there's one that everybody likes best, and they can all work on it or help make it stronger or add to the vocabulary or the poetry or whatever. And then, as we know, they love to do skits. So any kind of way you can make it into a presentation, even if the whole group doesn't get up and present, but the group that's worked on it, if it's the whole class or a larger group, can design it and then have the natural extroverts get up and do it.
And this is something that's, my students used to say we should get more than 1 credit for this class because we have to do everything under the sun in here, which is true. I mean, having to stand up in front of your peers and make a presentation is not the easiest thing to do. But it is something that they probably need to work on as they go forward. So this is just a good time for them to be able to do this, and probably a safe way for them to do it.
So we would like Donna to read this to you after she tells you a little bit about it.
Okay.
Taught with the Cambridge Latin course for many years and was quite creative. You might know him from his website, totallylatin.com, where he has all kinds of great um, ideas about teaching modalities and ways to get the kids involved in writing and in speaking.
As you can see, it's about Stella. Excuse me. It's about Mattila, and her name is Stella Mattila. But if you look carefully through the story, you'll see a cum clause and an ut clause. So you know it's not Unit 1. This is probably someplace in Unit 3, but all of a sudden they have to remember again who these people were. So when Caecilius was habitareting in the Urbe Pompeiis, he was having a vitam bonum. Quotidiae, Caecilius gave his uxori Metelli an osculum. Quotidiae, Caecilius exibat from the villa, so that he could ambulare to the forum. Quotidiae, Caecilius putabat et Metellum semper sedere in atrio. Sed, quotidiae, cum Caecilius e villa exiret, quotidiae, Metella induit a capillamentum. And you probably would have to gloss that word for your kids. Means a wig. Quotidiae, Metella exibated e villa, so that she could festinare to the tabernum, where she was a cantatrix. Stella Mattila. Metella cantavidet so bene, that omnes weary in taberna placerent. Nemo sciwit, that stellam metellum esse revero metellum. Olum Caecilius intravited the tabernum, where Stella Mattila was cantabating. Having ingressus the tabernum, and audiens Stella Mattillum cantateming, at once Caecilius was in amore. Now, there's more to this story. He wrote 3 parts. And so this is just the beginning of the story. But talk about loving the story. The kids really got into this. And so they wanted to know the next part. They wanted to be part of the story. And of course, they did remember who Stella Mattila and Caecilius were.
And here's a perfect example of a story that gives you another point of view. We always make the joke, what does Mattila do all the time? And that's Sadie or was doing all the time. And here it is, oh, no, no, no. When nobody's looking, she goes off and has a whole nother life. So it's fun. So tonight is a little unusual for us because tonight is Donna's last webinar, unless we can convince her to do some more in the future. And why is that, Donna?
I am retiring. Yes. I am done at the end of December. So it's been a great ride. I have loved every minute of it, but it's just time. So I moved into an apartment.
We will miss her greatly and all her wealth and depth of knowledge. I often run to Donna and say, is this right? Or, and she knows the answer to just about everything I've ever asked her, or she can find the answer pretty darn quickly. So we are so appreciate all that she's done and been part of our team of 3. We've been a trifeminate of the CLC. And I don't know, it won't be the same after the end of this month.
Well, thank you. That was sweet. That was sweet. I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss it, but not enough to stay. So there.
Yeah, it's been great, and we wish you all the best. And we want to thank our audience for participating this evening. Thank you so much. We know everybody is really busy during this holiday season. And we hope that we can help you with anything Cambridge related. And if we can, please reach out to us at clctraining@cambridge.org.